Story 1. Keeping peanuts away from infants during the first 2 years of life, intended to prevent allergies, appears to have contributed to the rise in peanut allergies. The recommendation changed about 7 years ago. Story 2. A draining lymphatic system in the brain was discovered in 2016. Previously, scientists believed the brain had no lymphatic system. It is remarkable that we are still discovering major parts of human anatomy so recently. Story 3. The appendix was once thought to be a useless vestigial organ with no function. However, research over the past decade has shown that it plays a role in the immune system and in maintaining gut bacteria. Story 4. This study was published in 2012. The University of Michigan published research on how sweat glands affect the healing of wounds such as scrapes, burns, and similar injuries. For a long time, it was believed that new skin cells were created from the edge of the wound by undamaged surrounding skin cells. But the researchers found that sweat glands help produce new skin cells and that these cells emerge from within the wound itself. This is why your hands may become very clammy after you have scraped them. I am sorry, but I do not have answers to some of the questions. I became curious about this after I injured my hands once. Story 5. Approximately 11,000 papers have been retracted in the last 2 years for fraud, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. I believe a Nobel laureate had his or her cancer research retracted. Story 6. Wild boar are becoming more radioactive in the Chernobyl area because of their digging and foraging. Deer are becoming less radioactive because they feed at or above the surface. Wild boar dig deep enough to reach isotopes from Russian nuclear weapons testing. Story 7. Brains were long thought to lack a lymphatic system, but the discovery of meningeal lymphatic vessels changed that. Story 8. The exact timeline is debated, but the long-held Bering Strait land bridge theory for the original peopling of the Americas has, for the most part, been rejected by the archaeological community at large beginning around 2015. Findings predating the culture associated with the Bering Strait migration timeframe, termed the Clovis culture, have been continuously discovered since, if I recall correctly, the 1950s, though they were long dismissed by many academics. Improvements in radiocarbon dating in the 2000s and 2010s and further work at several important sites in North and South America have produced a strong body of evidence. The revised theory is that the original peopling of the Americas occurred before the Bering Strait land bridge was accessible. These people likely traveled by small boat and followed the Pacific coastline, migrating steadily to present-day Chile. The most comprehensive site supporting this is Monteverde in Chile, which contains clear evidence of a settlement that predates the Clovis culture by about 1,000 years and includes remains of more than 34 types of edible seaweed found far from the site, supporting a marine-adapted migratory subsistence strategy. The revised idea is that this first wave settled coastlines and habitable inland areas that were not still glaciated. After the land bridge became available, a second and possibly third wave of migration occurred, with limited admixture with modern-day North American peoples, assuming they are descendants of the first wave and that the first wave descendants did not die out entirely. There are many unknowns because of the limited number of human remains dating to that period and because many likely site locations are now underwater. But as analytical methods continue to improve, more discoveries are likely. It is not presented as fact, only as the interpretation that best fits current evidence. Unknowns remain because of limited archaeological sites, few ancient genomes for analysis, sparse diversity in surviving native populations for comparison, and technological limits. In 20 years, this hypothesis may be substantially revised as new information emerges. That is how archaeology works. Everything is a hypothesis. It is really interesting reading. I have been doing a deep dive into it lately out of curiosity. Story 9. You have eyelashes. Living in your eyelash follicles are mites. For a long time, it was believed these mites did not have anuses and did not defecate. They were thought to grow until they burst. In the last 10 years, researchers discovered that these mites do have anuses. This is important work. Story 10. Our connective tissue is not just thick collagen holding our organs in place. It consists of interconnected sacs of fluid called the interstitium. To view organs at the microscopic level, researchers cut them into thin slices, fix and preserve the tissues with chemicals, and place the slices between glass slides. This preparation drained the sacs and caused them to collapse, so the structures were not seen previously because the method destroyed them. Story 11. Garter snakes are venomous. That does not quite count because it was discovered in the early 2000s. Story 12. Not really a refutation, but I always thought the redefinition of the kilogram was pretty cool. Instead of relying on physical objects to define a kilogram, all of which diverged in mass, scientists developed a Watt balance so that a kilogram depends on physical constants. I think they also changed the definition of the coulomb by a very small amount. See the Wikipedia article 2019 redefinition of the International System of Units base units for more context. Story 13. I am an astronomer. The detection of gravitational waves by the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory has been revolutionary. Among other things, we have completely changed our understanding of where the heaviest elements come from. I was taught that elements heavier than the first three were made in supernovae, including gold and silver. In 2017, we detected the first neutron star merger with the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, and telescopes observed it, allowing astronomers to measure its spectrum. It turns out that virtually all the heaviest elements, such as gold and uranium, are produced in neutron star mergers, not supernovae. Periodic table by Astronomical Origin illustrated this change. The first gravitational wave was detected in 2015. It was the merger of two black holes. This was a surprise because a neutron star merger had been expected to be more likely, but signals detected by the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory are now dominated by black hole mergers. Black holes of this size exist and merge more often than previously thought. Story 14. I am not an expert. My sources are conference talks on YouTube by biologists and scientists who cited academic sources. Do not take this as definitive. Paleontology and paleoanthropology have made huge advances in the last decade thanks to the introduction of ancient deoxyribonucleic acid sequencing alongside the fossil record. We have revised several long-held ideas, demonstrated the existence of Denisovans, and shown that they interbred frequently with Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Deoxyribonucleic acid studies have also clarified human evolution and geographic distributions. For tens of thousands of years, the Homo sapiens population may have remained at around 1,000 reproductively active individuals. After that bottleneck, humans expanded into the Middle East and then spread more widely. This population bottleneck partly explains why modern humans are genetically similar. Please anthropologists correct any mistakes. Story 15. Eating eggs does not raise serum cholesterol in the body. The egg white fad is going away. Story 16. The monoamine theory of depression posits that imbalances in neurotransmitters such as dopamine, serotonin, and gamma-aminobutyric acid are the primary cause of depression. The current prevailing theory is that prolonged stress can physically damage specific areas of the brain and may lead vulnerable individuals or those with a predisposition to develop depression or other mental disorders. Story 17. A long-standing conjecture in particle physics, supersymmetry, seems increasingly doubtful because the Large Hadron Collider has found no evidence. Some versions remain possible at higher energies, but it was surprising that no new particles have appeared so far. If you do not know about supersymmetry, you may have heard of string theory, which builds further on supersymmetry. String theory is therefore also at risk of being experimentally disproven. Neither theory was based on experimental evidence but on intriguing mathematics, so technically they are not scientific assertions. Many theoretical physicists assumed they would eventually be experimentally validated. Story 18. The central nervous system was thought to lack a lymphatic system until about 9 years ago. Story 19. I mentioned this in another thread, but the idea that sugar is more to blame for heart disease and other nutrition-related illnesses than fat is recent, thanks in part to lobbying by the sugar industry, and it has ruined careers. Story 20. The food pyramid was flipped upside down some time ago, rendering what we had been taught for decades wrong. Story 21. In a Grand Rounds presentation I attended last year, I learned that the theory that aluminum causes Alzheimer's disease had been disproven, and researchers are now focusing on pesticides. Story 22. All that so-called junk DNA does have functions. Turns out we need it. Story 23. Things like depression are no longer pinned on chemical imbalance. The hunt for a true mechanism continues. Story 24. About 10 to 15 years ago, paleoanthropological and comparative anatomical research produced data suggesting that humans never had a knuckle-walking ancestor. It appears that the other great apes developed knuckle-walking independently from each other, and humans began developing bipedalism early on from an arboreal, ape-like ancestor that did not yet have any specialized methods for traveling on the ground. I would imagine it somewhat resembled a gibbon's shamble. Story 25. The idea that most dinosaurs had feathers is an important point. They are typically depicted as large featherless lizards. That appearance is so ingrained in society that we have largely ignored the evidence. Story 26. The gut, more specifically your microbiome, is responsible for much more than just gut health. Story 27. I think a study published within the last year said clinical depression does not have anything to do with an imbalance in dopamine or serotonin. I could not remember which. It suggested psychiatric medications are largely doctors trying different treatments to see what works. Story 28. For the longest time it was thought that plants could only absorb simple, small ions like nitrate at their root tips. In short, plants, 1. Consume whole single-celled microbes with their roots. 2. Attract and foster microbial populations by releasing sugars and carbohydrates into the soil. And 3. Repeat this in a cycle. Plants nourish microbes, partly consume them, and release survivors back into the soil to begin the process again. Essentially, plants farm microbes as we farm animals. The older model was, microbes consume organic matter, immobilization, microbes die or release waste and produce plant-available nutrients, mineralization, and plants take up simple ions. In 2008, a researcher at the University of Queensland reported that plants can absorb whole living bacteria and yeasts at their root tips. Around 2017, James White at Rutgers showed that this root feeding is cyclical. A plant attracts microbes by releasing exudates at root tips. Once inside, it strips cell walls by exposing microbes to oxidizing oxygen species, absorbs their bodies wholly or partially, and expels surviving microbes back into the soil through root hairs further up the root. Those surviving microbes decompose organic matter in the soil, then return to root tips drawn by sugars and carbohydrates and are reabsorbed, continuing the cycle. Root hairs appear to form specifically for this process. In bacteria-free environments, plants form no root hairs. Root hairs grow in response to the presence of single-celled microbes moving through the periplasmic space between root cells. Plants may expend as much as 75% of the products of photosynthesis to exude microbe food at root tips. Thus, a microbe-plant interaction that is arguably essential to life on the planet was only described recently. The discovery did not require fancy microscopes, only staining. Had researchers been looking for it, it might have been found decades earlier. Story 29. All my life, the Milky Way was said to be about 100,000 light-years across. About 10 years ago, astronomers began saying it may be twice that size. Large calculations can have large errors, I guess. Story 30. The crisis in cosmology is less than 10 years old. We had a theory about how the universe formed and how old galaxies are based on observations from the Hubble Space Telescope and other instruments. When the James Webb Space Telescope came online, it could see much farther and found galaxies that should not exist at those distances, and then it found more. Now the two methods for dating galaxies do not agree, and the disagreement is growing. No one knows which method is correct. It is possible that both are wrong. Story 31. The theory that beta-amyloid proteins cause Alzheimer's disease was largely debunked as poor science around 2015. Eliminating beta-amyloid does not stop disease progression, yet researchers continue to publish studies pursuing cures that target beta-amyloid. Story 32. Brontosaurus is not the same as Apatosaurus. For decades, people believed otherwise. Story 33. Water evaporation is not only caused by heat. The recent confirmation of the photomolecular effect shows that light can make water evaporate faster than heat alone. This has significant implications for our understanding of cloud formation and other weather patterns and could enable low-energy drying and desalination methods. Story 34. My first thought was that Pluto was no longer a planet, But that happened in 2006. I looked it up. Story 35. Running and exercise are good for the cartilage in your joints, including the knees. Hyaline cartilage can heal and recover. There is an ideal volume of activity, but it varies for each person. Consistency is important. Long breaks from running can be detrimental. Story 36. Applying ice can impede healing. The increased blood flow from inflammation is the body's natural repair response, and reducing it can slow recovery. Ice mainly provides temporary pain relief by numbing the area. Story 37. Are we calling time on the amyloid hypothesis yet? It feels like it has suffered many significant setbacks, but some researchers will not let it go. Story 38. I do not know all the details, but over the past few years several key Alzheimer's disease research papers have been retracted for containing fabricated evidence. One major paper from 2006 heavily influenced how scientists approached Alzheimer's disease for 16 years and was cited by many other studies. Investigators found that important images in the study had been manipulated, which significantly alters the hypothesis of how Alzheimer's disease develops. Story 39. I was in bed, exhausted, but this thread is so good that my mind is going in all different directions. Thanks to the original poster. As a keeper. Story 40. Contrary to common advice, allowing your knees to travel over your toes during exercise can increase joint resilience. Story 41. Our mothers were told hormone replacement therapy before and after menopause causes breast cancer. That was a misinterpretation of data from a longitudinal study. In fact, estrogen and other hormones used in hormone replacement therapy do not increase breast cancer risk in most women and can help prevent other conditions, including heart disease, dementia, and osteoporosis. Millions of women went through menopause without treatment for decades for no good reason. If you are having perimenopause symptoms, ask your clinician about hormone replacement therapy. It can start in the early 30s for some women. Sources were provided from government health literature, University Health News, Public Radio, The Economist, and a cardiology journal. Medical and drug studies rarely included women until the 1990s because of menstrual cycles and the possibility of pregnancy. A directive in 1977 excluded many women from drug trials. It was reversed in 1993. We are only now learning basic information about how women's bodies work. Although women are more than 50% of the population, medical science has often treated men as the default. There will likely be many advances now that research has increasingly included women. Story 42. Part of the original definition for microbe was that it referred to organisms we could not see with the naked eye. Then Thiomargarita magnifica was discovered. Can be a centimeter long. Wild. Story 43. The temperature is not the reason the balls are on the outside after all. Story 44. There is a condition called aphantasia in which people lack the ability to visualize in their mind's eye. When asked to picture a red rubber ball, all they see is blackness. By the way, I was 64 years old when I discovered I had this. It is not refuted. It is a somewhat common condition that went undiagnosed. It is estimated that 2 to 4% of the population have it. Story 45. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is only for hyperactive little boys and they all grow out of it. Newsflash. A large number of adult women have been diagnosed over the past 5 to 7 years because, shockingly, it presents differently in girls and women. Story 46. This is only a theory, but in 2022 research published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society be cast doubt on the out-of-Africa theory of human origins, suggesting modern humans may have evolved in multiple regions of Africa rather than a single location. Story 47. The belief that only settled humans with agriculture built stone memorials and temples was overturned by Göbekli Tepe. It was discovered in the mid-1990s. The implications only entered the public eye about 10 years ago. Archaeologists argue for a longer timeline. Story 48. Ophthalmological research has changed what we thought we knew about vision and neuroplasticity. Many conditions previously thought to be permanent after early adolescence are now treatable in adults through vision therapy programs. This includes correction of accommodative and convergence anomalies, amblyopia, strabismus, and visual changes following a cerebrovascular accident. Individuals with suppression are now able to activate their suppressed eye and achieve stereopsis. It is an exciting time in the field of ophthalmology. Story 49. The serotonin and monoamine hypothesis of depression also comes to mind. If I recall correctly, there were large meta-analyses that found low serotonin can, but does not necessarily play a role in causing depression. Some patients have similar or even higher levels of serotonin and of serotonin receptors, and selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors do not work for most patients. It is not directly observable. It is actually kind of sad because when I first learned this, I found it so interesting that I wanted to study the field. But now at university, we learned that this idea is not true and that the situation is much more complicated. Story 50. New evidence refutes the claim that the brain finishes developing at age 25. Story 51. The low-fat, no-cholesterol, low-calorie light trend basically ruined an entire generation's idea of what is healthy. Cutting out good fats is one of the worst things you can do for your health, especially when food products replace them with sugars. My dietitian told me this years ago, and nobody believed me until recently when articles began appearing about it. It is almost as if the medical community has been insisting that simple whole foods, foods that do not remove naturally occurring elements in the name of health such as yolkless eggs or low-fat yogurt, are much better for you. Food producers and diet advertisers have handpicked doctors who will say anything for money or a headline. They will do anything to get you to buy their product. The high-protein fad is part of this. Get your protein from whole foods, not from a bar that is 90% whey. Story 52. The recent back-to-back reconstructions of Spinosaurus aegyptiacus have excited paleontologists. Story 53. Tie, waiting, simplistic, wakeful, label, gray, shy, rainstorm, coherent, zephyr. Story 54. Images from the James Webb Space Telescope provide additional evidence that our previous estimate of the age of the universe was incorrect. Edited from the original. See replies from experts for more detailed information. Story 55. The idea that dietary cholesterol was the main culprit in cardiovascular disease is false. The science never supported it, and after 60 years of harmful recommendations, health authorities finally acknowledged the error and removed all recommended limits on dietary cholesterol. Story 56. The idea that happiness plateaus after an annual income of $75,000 is challenged by Matthew Killingsworth's research. He found that happiness continues to increase with income above $100,000 for many groups of people. Combined earlier and more recent studies suggest that people who are naturally prone to unhappiness see a plateau around $100,000, while naturally happy people experience increasing happiness as income rises. Story 57. This is by far the best Reddit thread I have stumbled upon. It will be the first thread I save. Story 58. Just last year, researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology showed that light can evaporate water without any heat and can do so more effectively than heat. This helps explain why there has never been an accurate climate model. Story 59. The advent of high-throughput genetic sequencing has eliminated any biological basis for racial categories. Story 60. The fact that cerebrospinal fluid washes over your brain while you sleep was recently discovered, if that counts. Story 61. Researchers have examined many claims about human brain structure and function. They have disproved several psychological assertions and shown that concepts such as laziness do not, in fact, exist. Story 62. There has been doubt about life elsewhere in the universe. There are 60 billion potentially habitable planets in the Milky Way alone and sextillions in the universe. Two implications follow. 1. There must be life elsewhere. 2. It will be absolutely impossible to have any interactions with any other life form since they are separated by vast numbers of light years. A third implication is that we may be too isolated from other life forms. While some life forms may be close to one another, interact, and form interplanetary societies. I find that fascinating because we can only assume they exist without any way to confirm it. Story 63. Moderate drinking, think a glass of wine with dinner, is good for you. It's not. Story 64. Awareness of pelvic floor health has changed significantly in the last decade. It is no longer treated as just a women's issue. For a long time, Pelvic floor problems such as leaking when coughing were viewed as issues only for mothers who had vaginal births. Over time, we learned these problems can also affect people who had cesarean sections. We now understand pelvic floor dysfunction affects people of all ages and genders, including men and children. Awareness of male pelvic floor dysfunction has improved in recent years. Even when the focus was on mothers, the advice they received was poor. For incontinence, the recommendation was simply to do Kegel exercises. For pain during sexual activity or any vulvar or vaginal discomfort, they were told to do Kegel exercises. This was the advice given to mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, and others. It does not work and can worsen problems. Current advice is to leave the pelvic floor alone and, if you have concerns, see a physiotherapist for assessment. They will probably not prescribe Kegel exercises and, in fact, most will strongly advise against them. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.